Hey everyone, welcome to the Art Grind Podcast. I'm Tun Myaing and I'm here with Konstantin Rudnichenko. And I'm the producer and also your host for today. I met Konstantin recently while we were filming his course for the Academy Everywhere Self-Paced series. And his course was focusing on composition and also texture and brushwork. And these are things that I've heard a lot of times, and there have been other people covering the same information, but something about the way he was presenting the information made it stand out more and made me perk up my ears. And so, we had conversations afterwards. We even went to the Met and looked at a bunch of paintings, and we had such a good conversation that I wanted to keep continuing it and try to find out more about him. So came all the way out here to Connecticut, where we're at right now in Konstantin's studio, and we're gonna kind of jump into it. So Konstantin, you don't have much of a web presence. You are, you have a great Instagram page with your beautiful paintings, but I don't know that much about you. And I don't know if everybody out there does either. So I like to usually kind of start off with, your back history, like where you're coming from and all of that. So let's talk about that.
Awesome. Well, it's a pleasure to have you here. Thank you so much for coming. I grew up in Ukraine. I left Ukraine when I was probably around 18. We used to live with my family in Crimea, and we live in Kryvyi Rih, between the two cities. We left Crimea in 2014, around the time, because actually it was occupied by Russians, so we had to leave it. And probably since I was 18, 19, I was living in New York and studying at our Students' League.
Wow. Where were you living in New York?
The last couple of years I was living in Bed-Stuy, on the border with Bed-Stuy and Bushwick. It's a pretty crazy neighborhood.
Yeah, on our right here, you were telling me some stories about it.
Right.
Do you mind sharing one or two,
right.
just to kind of paint the picture of
right.
how your daily life was?
Right. Well, for those of you who don't know what Bed-Stuy is in New York, it's just an extremely rough, kind of weird neighborhood. And I remember I went to the Metropolitan Museum and I had the most beautiful, the most wonderful day in my life. And then I was going back to the apartment where I live, and then all of a sudden I see like a glass shattered all over on the sidewalk. And then I see that police arresting like a naked guy, like fully naked guy. Well, it turned out that my neighbor from upstairs went up to the roof with the glass table, and he threw it from the roof just on the sidewalk on somebody's car. And and then from there he got arrested. But that's just the kind of the environment that it creates.
Typical Monday in Bed-Stuy.
Right, it's not even anything special.
Right. And so no wonder you came all the way out here.
Right, no, here it's very different. It's very quiet and it's very peaceful.
Yeah.
It's a complete different.
I felt it. I remember as I arrived today and we went out to the porch and just hearing nature, the sounds of bugs, birds, it completely just calmed my mind. It just changed the brainwave like that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Just kind of like we were talking about that, in the city, there are so many people, yet everyone is lonely, so it's very much like Blade Runner, kind of like industrial, city, which also questionable how much it was actually meant for people and how much people are just being swallowed by the city itself.
Yeah, and if you put on top of that our profession, which is painting, you're also locking yourself in a studio, and potentially not a very comfortable studio, because those buildings are not built in a way where it's conducive to the changes of the weather. Right. Like my apartment, for example, it just gets extremely hot now, especially with the global warming and all of that. Is just not sustainable.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
So
I think a lot of it has to do with what it's like being an artist and what it's like, what people think it is being an artist. So those are two very different things. So supposedly being an artist in New York is such a great thing, but at the same time, um, and I think that's the reason why there are so many people that started, but very few people who actually proceeded all the way, because the expectations and reality, the harsh, ragged reality, is so different from what people expect it to be. But actually, I think it's way more beautiful than what we can imagine, as long as we allow that it's different from what we expect.
what would the expectation be?
I think, it just it's a lot more difficult than what most people expect. I think it really just requires such a long time and such a hard work to achieve anything really. Just to, I'm not even talking anything about anything special, but even just the basic skills, very basics, I think take a really long time and take so much work. And time, especially when you live in the city, it's a lot of money. So, being able to put all that time, it's also being, managing and juggling so many things at once. But I don't think we are alone in that, because like when we look at, a lot of the different artists throughout the centuries, we do see that they were facing a lot of the same struggles. I do like to read, historic books or latter books, and it's their experience was so similar in so many ways to what we're going through too.
So we're not special.
Right,
It's
no,
a little
no.
different,
Right.
but it's same struggle.
Right, yeah.
Yeah. And I think you're telling me that when you came to the States at 18, you didn't even speak. You had like basic level English.
Right, yeah. I think, the first time that I came, and the first place that I came into to America was Texas, and I didn't speak English at all, pretty much. So I kind of had to learn it from scratch. But the good thing that I wasn't in I was only in English speaking environments. So basically I was left with no choice. And after being left with no choice, I feel like you learn pretty quick. And, then I went back to Ukraine for probably a year, and then I came back to Florida 1 year after. And from there, it was a lot easier, but still, it was a continuous journey to learn it better and better.
And I know we talked about this a lot already, but just for the people out there, what was your job in Florida?
Yeah, I worked in Disney World. It was an exchange program for students, so it was really fun. It was a really fun summer, and yeah, in Orlando. And then from there, I moved to New York, and I discovered our Students League for myself, and I started studying there for a while. Then,
Yeah, and you told me that you were more interested in film, and
Yeah.
then art was sort of something peripheral to that.
yeah. When I lived in Ukraine and Sevastopol in Crimea, or for example in Kryvyi Rih, it's the city in the middle of Ukraine, it was the culture or the things that I was into, it was not so easily accessible, when it comes to paintings or anything like that. But in terms of the movies, and when I got introduced into it more and more, it was way more easily accessible. And I was really, really discovering the world of art through cinema at first. Just watching all the different classics, like we talked about Charlie Chaplin Modern Times, and how much it predicted and how incredible that movie is. But then you're basically watching everything that I possibly could. But then through that, I discovered the world of painting to myself. And I think it started overwhelming. Like at the moment, I don't really watch or care, to be honest, that much about movies. I do like it, I do appreciate it, but I love painting so much more, or drawing.
Yeah, and it was a more slow, gradual burn, right?
Totally.
Like you said, you didn't really go to the Art Students League with a goal in mind, right?
Yeah.
Like it slowly was something that grew on you.
It's almost like I feel a lot of the studying of painting or drawing, it's almost like studying ancient Greek or ancient Latin. It's like we don't even know if we like it or not, or if we like what could be written in it or not. It's just, the first couple of stages is simply learning the language, and then we learn to actually understand whether or not we like it, or we have tendencies to understand it better and stuff. But I think, at the moment, as it is, I feel painting and drawing and the language of painting and drawing is very hidden. It's something that people actually rarely speak. And very often they believe they do, but I think it has a lot to do with ignorance and has very little to do with actual knowledge.
Yeah, because it's such a niche thing. And
unfortunately, yeah.
Yeah. Do you remember, were you always sketching when you were a kid, or was there a certain time while you were at the Art Students League that you recognized that this was something that you were good at?
I think it's the constant question that you ask yourself, and how good you are at that, how much talent you have, and that's, can you even do that? So I think that's a really probably the most common question you ask yourself, especially for the first couple of years, and you don't necessarily even know what you're working with, until it. But I think what's beautiful about painting and drawing, that it's kind of you get what you give, So the more time, the more concentration, the more effort that you give into it, the more you will receive in the end. And as beautiful as that is, it also could be very frightening, because you can't. There are no shortcuts. Like when we have classes online, right? I always start, the first class with saying, don't even look for shortcut. The time that you spend looking for a shortcut, you could have probably learned, using that time. So it's just very cruel craft, in so many ways, but it's very rewarding craft too. I don't think it's only craft. I think it's combination of both art and craft, but I think one does not exist without the other.
Yeah, there's no hack. It's like learning how to swim. You can either float and swim or sink.
Right.
I think it's very similar with art. You can't fake it. You can't fake making.
Right.
I mean, yes, you can. There are ways to fake making art, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
You can't fake being good at art.
I think here's the thing, kind of what we spoke about a little bit earlier, that because there are not so many people in the audience that truly speak the language, people then instead look for stories, right? Like we were saying that, like when we look at Mona Lisa, we don't necessarily like the painting, we like the story behind it. Or we look at Van Gogh, we don't necessarily like Van Gogh, we like his letters, his stories, him cutting his ear, or the movie that we've seen about him. But then, if we talk about the less known artist, like let's say, recently I've been looking at Hendrik Terbakken, which is absolutely incredible Dutch artist, or someone like Bouverie, 19th century naturalist, very less known artists, but their work just as good as anybody. So when we don't have a story and we have to purely look for the quality of art, that's kind of, for me, that's truly what we should look for, like the actual art itself, rather than the story.
Yeah, and this is something that we delved into a lot in our previous conversations about, where does the responsibility lie? Because the audience, I feel like, have to do a lot more work than they currently are.
Right.
And that takes more effort in learning new vocabulary of how to interpret what they're seeing, what they're feeling when they're looking at a painting or a work of artwork. And also just getting more reps in.
Yeah.
Just seeing more art in general, so that they have a wider database. Right. It's like if they were AI, right? Like they've only seen only have like a set of 100 images.
If it's not Picasso, it's Van Gogh.
So they're just
Van Gogh,
like
it's Leonardo. It's
right.
Like,
so
there's something else. It's the database so narrow.
Exactly. So they're just like really dumb AI. Like you put in a prompt, but they're like, I don't know. It looks like a photograph or whatever it is. Like, I think the institutions or, artists can potentially, or maybe galleries and museums could help kind of having them meet them halfway, or
Yeah.
putting more effort into teaching them
Yeah.
how to interpret things too. And I don't take it personally when people don't know how to interpret it. I think, I think it's great when they...
It's a great opportunity for us to share it,
Right.
and because I have a friend from Brazil who's a classical artist, and he told me that his whole life was changed after he saw Velázquez's book. The moment he saw it, the moment he saw those reproductions, that was, he didn't know that anything like that exists in the world. He didn't know where he could study to do that, but he knew that that is art. That was definition of what is special and good and interesting, and it was working for him in so many levels, and he didn't need to be an expert, but as a child he was able to recognize it, and he was able to see that that is something so special for him.
Yeah. So do you think that's something inherent, like inherent talent, or inherent artist's eye?
I think it may be like combination. It's hard to tell. I don't really know. I can say that on my end, when I was a kid and I went to the museum for the first time and I was looking at Rembrandt paintings, and I went with my mom, and she was so annoyed with me because I would stay on every painting looking at it for hours, I wouldn't move. Like I choose one painting, I would just start staring.
Wait, how old were you then?
Like probably 12 or 11 or something. Wow. Like maybe even, no, I think maybe even 10 or something like that. But That's impressive. She wanted me to move fast. She was like, come on, chop, chop, let's go, but I couldn't, I was just, when I was looking at, one of my favorite, Ukrainian artist, Rapin, and I remember looking at his works and I was just so blown away. And she just hated it, that I look so long. I mean, she was patient, but I was taking an hour to look at one painting or something. Right. And I was, I don't know where it was coming from, but I couldn't move. There was just so much that was going on. And and I think that was the moment, as much as I like all of those beautiful movies, like Blade Runner, or Barry Lyndon or whatever, all of those great movies, but painting was so much bigger to me. After looking at it, it's unbelievable. But it's such a silent art. It's so easy to miss. I think that's the kind of sense that we could the most easily miss. Because, for example, if we taste something that taste awful or too salty or extremely spicy, we're even not going to eat it immediately. We're going to be like, this is awful, right? Or if something tastes good, it doesn't matter who you're talking to, but they will enjoy the good food. But when it comes to a good painting, right, or seeing something visually that is stunning, that is way more challenging, and it's very easy to miss, or very easy to go into the storytelling rather than enjoying painting or drawing for what it is. Similarly, right, if we taste something good, we don't want to hear the story of this and that. We just want to taste something that is delicious.
And I think there's many levels to it, right? Because when you're looking at a painting, what are you looking at? Are you looking at the subject matter?
Yeah.
And depending on the work of art,
yeah,
it can be very loud.
Yeah.
It could be very complicated.
Yeah.
And sometimes people just don't know the point of entry. They don't even know where to start to interpret it. Some paintings need wall text to sort of explain what it is even, sometimes with abstract art or minimalist work. And sometimes it is helpful if their iconography is familiar to the audience. And if it is just self-referential, then the general audience completely blocked out. So I think there's different levels of it. We take for granted the way we appreciate it because we can interpret all the different iconographies, the way it's made, composition, and we can appreciate it more and deeper. But to get there takes years, and it takes a lot of effort just learning about these things. So, but even before that, those are learned traits. I think we were talking about also having that natural eye to be able to just appreciate it for what it is. I find it incredibly unusual that a 10-year-old would stare at a painting for that long.
I was gonna say that, once I went to the Frick collection, and there was like a group of kids from some kind of school, with the teacher. And then the kids were allowed to just kind of like talk about painting, and they were looking at, Vermeer and Rembrandt. And it was actually pretty fascinating how right on point they all were, because I was listening to them and I was like, wow, this is incredible. So it's almost like when we say that we want to not make ourselves, but find ourselves or something like that. So I think it's similar to with art, that we not necessarily, we want to return and come back to something that we already have. Because I think like when kids are honest about what they're seeing, and they're honest how exactly that affects them, and they're honest whether or not they like it or not, that is great, But the moment that people start pretending and start using all of the philosophical theories, so it's like, I like this because Picasso is, so clever and he was trying to represent humanity or this or that. So adults don't have as much honesty to be like, no, I don't like Picasso. There is nothing there that I see that is interesting. So there's a lot of pretending. And I think, those who don't like something, they feel left out to say like, oh, well, I don't particularly like Kandinsky or whoever, because, supposedly it must be good or something like that. So I think a lot of it is also just kind of getting too theoretical, too philosophical, rather than purely trusting your honest instincts. Because I think we still do have that, appreciation.
That reminds me, this book I was reading recently, I was going down this rabbit hole about meditation and a very specific way of meditating where you try to find the thing that's looking, like you turn your attention back onto yourself, and then you find out that according to this theory, it's like there's nothing there. And there's stages of it where when you're a kid, you like there is no boundaries, right? It's just you're in the moment,
right?
And then as you grow a little older, there is a little bit of boundary, and then you start seeing yourself from outside in.
Right. Yeah.
You start developing a little bit of identity, and then the older you get, that identity just becomes like solid.
Yeah.
And that part is the illusion.
Yeah.
Whereas the beginning part is the actual true self. So I think when those kids were expressing how they felt, that was like pure.
Right, exactly. As pure as it gets.
Exactly. That was like the most honest reaction you could get to a painting. And I think like now as adults, we're going through so many solid layers.
Right.
Not just our identities.
It's
exactly.
Like, what could I say? What can I not say?
Right. And if I say this, would I look stupid?
Right, exactly.
On and on and on, like ad infinitum. So that is difficult. So I think, when people do give honest feedback about a painting without all of that, that's also great. So not to discourage that, but there's also another level which takes a little bit more effort to enjoy it even deeper.
Right.
And that's a whole other thing.
So it's almost like going through certain stages, it might blind us a little bit, like you said, what other people think, or what is acceptable, or what is liked, or how will I be seen for that, And through that, I think there is a little bit of process of losing yourself, and therefore would then need to find yourself again. So it's almost like you said that, there was, I can roughly translate it, but there was this Ukrainian writer, poet, from 90s. He basically said that they found the treasure in the garden, and inside of that treasure there was the same garden, and trees were just the same. So basically the treasure that you were looking for was always there, but it's also a matter of us seeing it. And I think what blinds us is the expectations, and what blinds us is our ideas of what is good life or what is good something, right? So I think through painting and through drawing, we learn how to be fascinated by nature as it is, to appreciate nature as it is, and also realize that that is the ultimate source of everything. The knowledge, the peace, the anything that we're looking for, we can find it there. And our narrow perception of what nature should be is so little compared to what nature is itself.
Yeah, and our visual spectrum is so tiny.
Right.
Compared to like what reality actually has. So even within our like very limited reality, it can still be rich.
Absolutely.
But I feel like there's so much more we can delve into just on this topic of how to look and what you're seeing. But maybe we can move on a little bit more. So I'm interested in what your experience was at the Art Students League. Like, where did you pick up your worldview and like the style that you paint? Like, I haven't seen your earlier works. I only know you as you are now. So what did it look like in the beginning, and what was the journey like, and who were you looking towards as far as artists that influence you and sort of pop culture and things like that?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, the people I studied with at the league, I've studied with Leonid Gervitz, I've studied with Robin Smith and Harvey Dinnerstein, and a lot of the other class, basically every class that there was at our Students League, I was there at some point, whichever class, like anatomy classes, with Frank Parkour, Jerry Weiss classes, just Marshall Jones classes, like, so basically trying to learn from everybody, because, we could see things differently, right? We could have our own vision, but it's not the matter of just disagreeing for the purpose of it. Like, every single different point of view has something good in it too. And I think if we learn to recognize it, because I remember, and I see the tendency, with the students that we have in my online class, the moment they just sign up, they have so many questions. But then the more class goes on, the more quiet they get, because they understand that the questions are being answered, and it's kind of like on their end now to work kind of thing. So it's almost like, it's a matter of learning how to learn. And, but yeah, I think as a major mentors, like I did really like, Leonid Gervitz class and Robin Smith, and those were two very different, but it doesn't mean that I love their works. But I still tried to stay true to myself. And I think that's what they also were encouraging. Because I think, a good teacher wants to kind of develop something what you already have, rather than make you like a minor version of what they do. So I felt fortunate to have that freedom from the start. And from there, inevitably, I was going to the Met. One of my favorite painters is Eng and Rembrandt, and many, many others, like so many that I love. But I just remember going to the Met and doing like master copies and painting in the museum and drawing in the museum and just looking for hours. And that is just so helpful, because what we, I think in one of the classes, one of the teachers that I studied with, he said, "Why would you want to paint like me if you have Degas?" And I was just such an honest, response on his end, because, I appreciate and love my teachers so much. But in the end, I was going back to the source. What did they like? What do they learn from? And that was really helpful. And I think some revelation that I had when I was working from Eng and copying Eng in the Metropolitan Museum, and it was just so incredible. And I remember thinking that the things that I could learn by copying are so incredible, and I never heard it from anyone else. It's just, I'm seeing it here, in that painting.
So you're getting a first-hand experience.
Exactly, yeah.
Instead of somebody trying to tell you what that's supposed to be.
Yeah, I think it's how it's meant, because, a good teacher trying to really direct you to the source. So it's like, it doesn't matter how hard they try to it's almost like, they bring you to the place where there is a fresh, beautiful, tasty water, but only you can drink it. And I think the more you're being forced to drink it, the less it actually works. Because I remember I did sign up for some classes that were very kind of like manual. First this, then that, and it didn't feel right, and it doesn't really work as well. And I think even if it brings an immediate result, on the long run, it actually doesn't work as well.
Yeah. And you mentioned one of the teachers told you to stay true to yourself. That's assuming you already had a self that you sort of figured out already, like a style.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think it's it's not the problem of having it. I think it's nothing that we should be concerned too much about for a really, really long time. I think style, it's almost something that we cannot not have. So it's almost like something it's almost like, imagine that you have to try to not be yourself for a long period of time. Like if you were told that for 10 years you cannot be yourself, just do the opposite, kind of like that Seinfeld when George was doing the opposite. I don't know if any of you know it, but it's basically like, he was trying to do the opposite that he would normally do. But it's like, we just cannot do that. We are who we are, and it will show in our works, but it's not the matter of coming up with interesting style. It's the point of becoming interesting, It's a moment of changing yourself, putting the hard work, and becoming better with that. I remember there was, the League has a lot of very strange, peculiar characters. And I remember there was one lady that comes over and she said, I don't have no kids, no nothing. Painting is my kid. That's my child. I've been doing it for so many years. And I remember looking at her works. I was like, damn, you probably should have a kid.
Oh man!
But it's kind of like that. I like the comparison now, because I like, I like that it's almost is like that. But it's also a matter of how well we grow that kid, what kind of information we give to that. And I think, the level of getting better at it is also comparable to having a kid. When you work on it for 10 years, it's still a child. You work on it 20 years, it's a young adult, right? So it's a really long journey.
So I think, with a lot of things that you could practice and get better at, I think the assumption is the more time you spend on it, the better you will get. Now, I don't know, I have not seen that lady's work that you mentioned, but apparently she's been doing it for a long time.
Hopefully she's not watching this.
But she's been doing it for a long time and not improving. Right? So what's the problem there? And I think we talked about this, and my theory is that it's an intellectual switch. Like you can progress your eye-hand coordination and how you execute things, but if you're stuck conceptually or mentally, then you can't get to that next level. So that may be the case.
I remember asking myself that same question, because, at the League, all of the classes are very self-paced. It's all up to you how far you want to bring it, which classes you want to take, what discipline you want to work on. And I remember, and even discussing that, with a lot of my friends and asking that same question and trying to find the answer. And I don't think I have a full answer, but I think it's almost similar how it is in life. It's almost, if we don't learn from our mistakes, we run into the same mistakes again. And if we continue refusing to learn from it, it's going to continue repeating it. So it's almost like a universal law. And I think, drawing or painting, it's kind of like the world in miniature. So in other words, if you run into a certain problem, as I see often with students, I think one of the most crucial problems that we run into as a beginners is proportions. It's the most difficult to learn. It takes a long time. But for example, we get the wrong proportions and we don't change the way we go about it. And we just continue. So repetition, no matter for how long you repeat it, will not
if you're doing it wrong.
Right, exactly. So it's like, it doesn't matter how many times you do it, you will end up with poor result again and again and again and again. And then, we could justify it, we could find a reason for it, but in the end, I think learning, it's a very painful experience. It's because we always need to face our mistakes. we always need to do some sort of after action review and be like, okay, this went well, this didn't. There are things that I could learn, there are things that I could improve. And I think, that way of learning how to learn is so important, because I remember looking even, at like, for example, Harvey Dinnerstein. He was in his 90s when I was studying with him.
Wow.
And I was just fascinated how he always wanted to know more. He never, and like with Gurvitz too, like he always, like there was so often that he didn't have an answer. For example, I asked something and he would be like, I don't know, I'm not sure. And that was just so incredible to hear, because you realize there is so much room that they're living for them to learn or to not know something, or to, kind of like this Faust-like idea that, no matter how much we learn, there is still always more to learn, and I think that's where, nature is very humbling, because I feel no matter how much experience you have, you always get surprised with nature itself. It's never that you could just sit there and everything goes according to the plan, because nature is way more complicated than any of our plans are.
Absolutely. The external, it's like once you step out of your room, it's out of control.
Right, even in the room.
Yeah, even in the room sometimes like random stuff falls down.
Right, yeah.
But yeah, so going back to, trying to take things to the next step, I think the first step is realizing that there's something wrong with your painting.
Yeah.
And some people realize it, or they don't.
Right.
Or maybe sometimes they just ignore it. And they're like, I'm good. I love the way it is right now.
Right.
I don't care if it's bad, or maybe they know it's bad and they just don't care. And they're like, oh, this is just my style. This is me.
Right.
It's not
I think
wrong.
it's,
So that's one version of it. And from my recent experience is when I was starting on a new series of paintings, and I was almost finishing up one of my paintings while I was filming your course, and then you were talking about composition and texture and edge work. And I remember going back home and I was looking at that painting. I'm like, oh, damn it. This composition is off and the edges, they're too flat. And like, I think timing is very important when you get the information.
Yeah.
If you get that information when you're not trying to solve a problem, then it's just going to be useless to you. This is not going to matter. And I think that was the biggest difference, because then all of a sudden I'm like, oh, okay, cool. Like this and this and this I can fix. Got this new information. Next thing is execution, right? How can I do that? Boom. I already have the information. Just do the thing. Those are the steps.
Right. Yeah. I think it's a matter of like having a perfect amount of like self-doubt, to the extent where you can still feel encouraged to learn more, but not over-encouraged to be ignorant, or, it's almost like you want to be fascinated with your future self. So, it's you're not exactly obsessed with what you're doing at the moment, or, but you kind of moving towards something, and there is always something more to move towards. So it's almost like you're chasing the horizon. It's like whatever they say, that samurais don't have the destination, so they have a road, right? So it's almost like, it's not where you're trying to get, but the journey itself that matters. So I think, there's something beautiful about it, that, we want to leave for the road itself, just kind of what we're saying, that for the craft and the enjoyment of the thing. And while doing it, we want to become the best possible artist that we could be.
It's interesting because that goal is great for the artist for its own development. It's bad for the art market.
Right.
It's like a contradiction. And sometimes those two are aligned, but I feel like majority of the time, I think if if a gallery is able to sell a specific series of your work, they want you to keep doing the same thing. Right. So your growth is stunted.
Right.
Some galleries will take a gamble and let you keep evolving. Right. I don't know if I think there are rare cases where those two do align and it's fine. But
well, I think, I think, sometimes again, I do those little quizzes during our online class and I say, why do you guys paint? And people come up with all the different reasons where I think there is only one valid, solid reason. And I think that reason is I love doing it and there is nothing else that I would rather do. So again, like if we thinking too much about galleries, what would they think, and stuff like that, that could be a temporary period. But I think as the time goes by, that really doesn't matter because you want to ask yourself more and more often, what do you like? What are you doing it for? And I think everything else will work out somehow. I think it always does, but it's a matter, if we're truly trying to create something meaningful, I think we need to really dug deeper. Like we can't really influence too much, because I really love that book by Ibsen. It's called The Enemy of the People, and I was discussing that with my friend. Basically, in the book, the doctor comes to this little town, and then he realized that the main source of money for that little town coming from the source of water that is poisoned. And he's very loved in the city, everyone really obsessed with him, But the moment that he tries to change it, and rightly so, he says, listen, that water is poisoned, we need to do something about it. He becomes hated by everyone immediately. So basically, where I'm going with that, we can't really rely too much on the opinion of the crowd or a gallery. You might be a hero one day, you may be the worst enemy the next day, and then the hero again. But I think what matters is that we remain true to what we believe matters. It's our set of morals and standards when it comes to art. It's not anything that changes. We live by our word, we live by our standards, and we live by our beliefs, and that's how I was trained at Art Students League, with people who live their life for what they think is important and for what they think matters to them, regardless what time or people or crowd tells them. And I think if there would be more people doing that, I think we probably would have a better art overall. But I think, we just, if we think about it, most of the art that I'm not sure about you, but that I personally like, it's coming from, it was not necessarily directed by the crowd. If we look at Velázquez, right, he's directly working for Philip IV. Or we look at Holbein, right, Henry VIII, and those people, they almost were like lifetime prime ministers. That's how high their position was in the society. We'll look at Rubens. We'll look, so it wasn't necessarily art directed by the crowd, but when the art is given to the crowd, the effect of that wasn't necessarily as good. So I think we as an artist need to try to affect, those who are interested in that, first of all, and there aren't that many people for that to begin with. But those who are, we want to provide as good of the quality of art that matters. But those who are not, they still will not be. Like there's nothing that we could do to change that.
It is a lot harder to stick to those ideals nowadays, I think, especially with social media. Sometimes on one end of the spectrum, it is very helpful for artists for exposure, but it's also very distracting, because not only does it become you reacting to people, the crowd, it's also the algorithm. Yeah. So some artists might start changing the way they make work, or they might start making it faster so they could just have more output, more posts. And it just kind of messes up that whole idea of just sticking to the true nature of making art for the sake of making art and going on that journey. What are your thoughts on that? Like, how do you operate within, these murky waters?
I think kind of similarly, I just want to do what I love. I want to do it in the best possible way. I want to learn as much as I could and become, kind of challenge myself with every new painting. And then from there, I just try to take photos and hopefully expect that anybody else would like it or find it interesting. But I think, I think when you truly excited about something, I think when you truly put something special, the part of yourself into it, it becomes magnetic to other people. Like I think it attracts, there probably should be a line drawn from being a blogger online and being an artist, right? And I think, you could be very successful and have a very successful online presence, but it doesn't really mean that makes you a successful artist or, accomplished artist. So I think it's a balance, but I think, what matters, I guess we do need to balance it to some extent. We do need to do a little bit of both, so we have a little bit of presence online and stuff like that. But like I said, for me, again, the major reason is just because I love it, and I try to put it and just hope for the best. But I can't really say that I know much about it.
I'm definitely leaning towards the latter now too. I used to try to make these like complicated videos. I even bought all these camera mounts, try to put it on my chest or like put it on my shoulder to kind of capture what I'm painting. And then I'm like, this is so distracting, because when you're painting, it takes about 15 minutes to get into the zone,
right?
That sort of flow state. And if I have to stop every time and I'm thinking about, I need to press record or not, turn the camera off, it just messes with your entire flow. Yeah. So lately, I just said, scrap all that. Right. I'm just going to concentrate on the painting. Right. At the end of it, I'll take some pictures, and that is it. Right. Like, that's all you're going to get. Totally. It is probably not great for growing my account, but then, like, what does that even mean, anymore? I mean, yeah, there's some advantages to it, but it also depends on how you're able to translate that growth into something more substantial. Like, are you going to, if you're teaching, I suppose you could potentially get more students from it, but trying to grow an account for the sake of growing an account is also a bad strategy. Right.
Totally.
So yeah, there's just so many distractions, right? Like, I think in an ideal world, we could be like Holbein, sitting in that room trying to not move because you don't even want the dust to you don't want to get dust in the air so it falls on your painting, just that like very calm, silent,
but I think it probably was contrary. Like, I think those artists whose names we still remember in our day, they were the ones who managed to bring it to the highest level, to the level where kings in all the different countries, even without any social media, they were known. And then even after years, because, if we ask the question of how many contemporary artists we can with 100% certainty say that, 300 years from now, anybody would know their name, and that's a great question to ask. So I think, Holbein was that clever to not only make himself influential and important at the time that he lived in, and not only in terms of his own paintings, in terms of politics. Like I said, it's almost like lifetime prime minister position that he was holding by being an artist. That's how he wasn't capturing the history, he was part of making the history. And through that we still look at his works, and through that we still know him, so I think there is a lot of the thinking far ahead, there is, because again, like, I think a lot of what we think is important has a very narrow-sighted vision. It's the kind of vision that we think like, in 2 days or 3 days, will I get enough likes, or will enough people will say something? But why is it even important? Because if you were to put couple of years instead of couple of days into developing your craft, you most certainly create something that will then, be something interesting, something that will, first of all, would satisfy you instead of, again, chasing, some immediate goals.
Easier said than done. Our attention spans are so much shorter now. And like you're saying before, the machines are affecting the way we think, the way we perceive reality. It's shaping our reality. I think ideally, yes, like we would plan for the long-term goal and be smarter about predicting, 2-3 years ahead and what that could look like career-wise. Right. Not just your art alone. How does that play into politics and whatnot, I mean, the world is moving so fast right now that I wonder if this has always been the case, like each generation feels this, or is it actually faster now? Like, I don't know.
Yeah, I think it probably, I don't know. I think, I don't know what you think, tell me, but I think it probably is faster. Like, I think, what we were, on the drive here, we were talking about how, there is such a feeling bored. It's such a beautiful feeling, right? But the moment that people feel bored, they pick up the phone immediately.
Yeah.
Right. So it's the feeling of feeling bored. It's almost like we're so afraid of it. We're trying to fully get rid of it. So imagine, like 200 years ago, when the sun goes down, I don't know, in the winter day, right? What do? Like you don't even have light, it's like, what do you do with your time? It's almost like
Force yourself to sleep.
Yeah, exactly. It's almost like we create so many artificial things that we think are so important, but are they really, and what exactly we're doing? So it's almost like hustle, for no reason, just to make it feel like we're doing something with our time, like there is something that we're but I think life on its own, as it is, not the man-made life, but nature-made life, it's way more calm. Like I think it's way more
this is natural progression and cycles. I was listening to this tech podcast, and they were talking about the bans of phones in classrooms.
Yeah,
that's like a new thing.
Shit, yeah.
And they were doing a bit of a survey and having people call in, and so far everyone is very happy that there's no phones in the class. Like, duh.
Yeah.
And one of the teachers said phones have always been an issue in class, but he said post-pandemic it got worse because kids were so used to just looking at the phone. As soon as there's a second of silence or a second of new information, they flip out the phone and doom scroll. Whereas before, when we get bored, when we didn't have cell phones, back in my days, hardly, I think it was like we had beepers or something that was like almost. Anyways, you doodle. Like you scratch your like
or
in
you
your
daydream.
desk.
You daydream.
Or you just poking holes in your eraser or whatever weird normal
or
things.
you observe. You just look at something. You look in the window or something like that. But it's such a beautiful feeling bored. It's such a beautiful feeling in a way.
Absolutely, and I think your brain needs that time to sort of digest all the visual input, all the data that's incoming.
And we're so early in that development that we cannot really have a full image of the kind of effect that it will have on people, because that's what we were saying, right? That it's not only that we affect the technology, it works the other way around. Technology affects us, and it's almost that we were saying we cannot be a better computer than the computer, but we probably shouldn't even be trying. We cannot be a better photo camera than the camera, but we shouldn't even be trying to do that. So similar with the phone, that kind of reminded me because, when I would go to the league, I would have the classes from 7:30 in the morning. I come early to set up the studio until late night in the evening. So I would leave around 10 o'clock. And so all the time I would have the phone on in my coat. Like I didn't look at it or anything like that. It's just hang in the coat and stuff like that. And I remember in the summer we had a lot of the like kids coming to the classes, and I just remember that every break and during every class, to every minute, every 5 minutes, there's just always looking at the phone. Like there's just like you just get so bored, by looking at something. And I remember when I took my first class, I felt the same way. So I'm not being here judgmental or anything like that, but I remember by looking at the model for first 3 minutes, immediately I didn't know where else to look, what else is there. And I think that a lot has to do with us being blind, because then not only by studying more and more, it's not only that I could look at the model for 5 minutes, it could be then 10 minutes, then 20, then 30. And now it's not a problem to, certain project last for months, and then there is still something, and there is still more and more that we could see.
Yeah, and I think that that it's an isolation mechanism, right? Because imagine if if you're waiting in line at a bus stop or something before you had anything else to distract you. Maybe you might have had a book,
right?
But you might look around you, look at the people next to you. You might even strike up a conversation with a complete stranger.
Right.
And who knows, maybe they become friends, or you could get murdered, or it could go either way. Right. It's more interesting than looking at your stupid phone. Yeah. Right? Like, what are you learning there? Like, nothing. Like, it's just unnecessary, right? But like, your brain needs it, and it's just this little hits of dopamine. Like, I think we have a limited amount of dopamine. So like, at some point, our brains are just going to be numb.
Right.
Like, we're not going to be able to like have fun.
Right.
the feeling of joy is just sucked out of us by technology, which is like really sad.
And I think that's where art, comes into place, because that's, by looking at paintings, by looking at drawings, by looking at the example of the artists throughout the history that I personally admire, it kind of gives you the alternative, right? It's almost that escape from the matrix, right? So we through painting, we then learn how to give something a longer thought, right? We learn how to dig deep into our imagination or our inner voice, or, look for ourselves, just like we were saying earlier, or commit to a certain project through struggle, through, different stages where we like it, when we don't like it, through all of that roller coaster of emotion, but continue pushing it until we arrive to more or less decent result. So, not only that it requires inspiration, more often it actually requires discipline. So I think, painting and drawing should be probably more often, and I don't hear it enough, more often compared to sport, right? I think it's just as cruel, like if you have a professional runner or professional football, like soccer player, they just need to train and develop their talent every day. It doesn't matter how good they may be. It's a matter of consistent work, So there are a lot of things that we could argue, but one thing is discipline and amount of work. So I think, again, like when people wonder how much talent they have, they should be wondering that while working, while painting. So I think the only way to find out, it put, just the comparison that we were, saying about child, right? It's like 10 years, it's still a child, 20 years, it's a young adult. It's the same time that it takes, with painting. It really is the long journey, and it never should be underestimated.
And you don't see the results right away.
No.
Another, I love listening to David Goggins, and I don't know if you're familiar with who he is. But Goggins is pretty popular now. He's known for just being this like really fat guy, and then forcing himself to get into the Navy SEALs. And he like cut his weight down. He made it. He did Hell Week twice.
Right.
And he became an ultra marathon runner.
Right.
And he just kept breaking all these physical records. And his whole thing was, you have to callous the mind.
Right.
He said a lot of people, armchair philosophers, say there's a limit.
Right.
And he said, I broke through all the limits, not by listening to you tell me I can't do it.
Yeah.
He said, I just did it. And
that reminds me of, I had one of the teachers at the league. I probably shouldn't mention his name.
Yeah.
But he said, he was saying, when someone works too hard, he was saying this joke that, there was this guy that he's an Olympic swimmer, then he learned 10 different languages, then he run a marathon. And then he said he had a student like that in the class, and he came over, tapped him on the shoulder, and he was like, listen, your parents got divorced and it wasn't your fault.
Oh man, yeah, that's tough.
But he said there was an actual thing that happened to him in the class. That was his joke. So that totally reminds me of that.
But your motivation can come from anything.
Right. Yeah. No.
Right.
Absolutely.
Like Goggins had a seriously messed up childhood and a lot of, his anger and frustration got translated into his like insane motivation. But it's the same thing, callousing the mind. And he always says, once you start this journey, it's just going to be, pain, more pain, more pain, and then light at the end of the tunnel. Yeah. So you really have to stick it out there. And I feel like most people just pain, they stop. They're like, that's too much. And again, it's easier said than done, but it is discipline. Like when people think about artists, they don't think about discipline. That word does not come into play.
It's
like
actually.
It's like free roaming, free love.
That's very recent, actually. I was discussing.
And like, where did that? Where did that image come from?
That's kind of coming from this kind of like La Boheme, kind of like this,
it's like this
kind
French
of like
thing.
like drinking wine, like messing around all day, so it's the opposite to discipline. But actually, if we dig a little bit deeper, we do see that it was actually the opposite of that. The artist was almost equal to, a very precise, very organized, almost like a scientist, in the best, in the best sense of the word. So in any, tiny village, in France or Italy, there has to be an artist who could, anything that has to do anything with visual has to be accomplished through some sort of artist, which does require a lot of discipline.
Yeah. After talking to you, I was trying to look up some books on like the Renaissance, and I found this one book about the two artists that shaped the Renaissance, the two sculptors that were competing to work on the door.
Mm-hmm. Is it Cellini?
Yeah, like before Donatello.
Oh, okay.
But like the two main contestants. But they had to go, it was like a union that you have to be part of to become an artisan or just to be even able to get commissions.
Yeah, and it's a very, the standards were, the checking the quality of how you prime your canvas, where do you get your pigments from, how exactly you apply it, how good is your drawing, and that kind of stuff. So it's like you being, because again, like I think the idea of, art is about me, it's a beautiful idea, but I think it needs more explanation, to that. So we're not just expressing ourselves, as it's popular to say. Instead, it's a matter of, it's a matter of truly, it's a matter of,
what's like, who's like really themselves and can express themselves without limit?
Yeah.
A baby.
Right, exactly. No, exactly.
So like, okay, you want to be a baby.
Right.
Sure. Like just go cry as much as you want.
Right.
Like,
totally.
That is the epitome of
exactly. So it's like, I constantly bring up the quote from Degas to the students in the class. I say that art is not what we see, but what the viewers will see. And I think it's a very incredible shift of perspective. Instead of just thinking that you see something, you also want to ask yourself what truly your audience will see. And then to make it even more into perspective, you can also ask what the audience will see 50 years from now or 100 years from now. Would there still be something that is still important, that is not necessarily about some political event that comes and goes, or some, provocative subject that again comes and goes. But is there something that could be universally interesting, right? I think it's not necessarily, like you said, easily said than done, but that's something that shouldn't stop us from trying. That's the whole point.
Yeah. I remember when I was at FIT for my undergrad, I was in the illustration department, thank God, because the fine art department, they literally just told them to do whatever they wanted. Yeah. And that's fine art.
Right, yeah.
There's something wrong there.
Right.
And it's like, what's the point? I could have stayed home.
Yeah.
and done whatever I wanted anyways. Why would I have to go to school for that?
Yeah.
And it's a huge misconception of what expressing yourself is.
Totally.
It's completely unstructured.
So it's almost like, if we train in a Sargent, right, we're not just going to say like, well, here's the man, here's the sculpt, go express yourself, right? The results of it would be pretty devastating, right? Or similarly, right, from the simplest jobs to the most complicated ones. If you have your pipes in the house broken, you invite the plumber. You're not just gonna say like, dude, express yourself, just go for it, Like, again, the result would be pretty devastating, right?
Yeah.
But it's like, why do we think that, that it's acceptable with art, to have the kind of education where it's not always the case, but it's very often the case where you're simply being told, it's like, oh yeah, there's nothing there to learn. You know it all. Just like go ahead and do like express yourself and stuff like that. So if it doesn't work in any other field, whatever we look at, whether it's
even music,
no,
like
music,
absolutely,
poetry,
structure everywhere.
Right, exactly, it's everywhere. So from plumbing to woodworking to cutting trees or any craft or any job, it exists under certain set of rules. So no one could just simply like you said, express yourself, right? So it's a matter of learning, and it's also a matter not only where and for how long you study. It's the matter of exactly who's teaching you, exactly what do you learn. Because again, if you live under environment, just express yourself for 10 years and then you start realizing, wow, that's actually not enough, or there's something missing here, right? The realization could be pretty long. Because again, I keep hearing, both from my friends and the students, when they went to college related to art, they were told like, oh yeah, you don't want to paint like Michelangelo or Leonardo. It's easy. Anyone could do that. You need to express yourself. It's like, okay, like where exactly do we get that idea that anyone could draw like Michelangelo or Leonardo? Like it's not.
It's absurd.
It's absurd, yeah. But it's it's how it is,
Right. The other thing is, expressing yourself is a very one-sided, very selfish, insight. View, right? You don't even care about what the audience thinks about how you're expressing yourself. You just like blah, like me, whatever I do is correct. It's like, no, that's totally wrong.
Right. No,
like true artisans, like I think they do have an idea of what their audience is going to think of the thing they're doing, which makes the work better. They can refine it.
Yeah.
It's not just about them.
Yeah.
It's almost, it shouldn't be.
Exactly. It's almost like a matter of like who could speak, very successfully is the one who could listen the most, right? So I think it's similar in art, right? We could find the best possible words that all the other people could relate to if we learn how to listen to our life and nature in general and find certain similarities, and find something that anybody could understand, and that's why, for example, we could read the book from 100 or 200 years ago, but it has qualities that the writer was able to observe from his own life, from the life of his family and friends, that still touches us. Same with music, right? There are notes that touch us so deeply. Right, and similar with painting, we could look at Rembrandt, but we could see that something that he was able to observe is not only from the narrow experience of someone who didn't live life or was not interested about what other people going through. You could see how precisely and how deeply people in his paintings are observed. How profound that vision is. That by looking at it, we recognize that there's just so much in it, it's his own life, his own listening to other people's life, his vision, and all of those things that, again, so how sensitive he was to life itself.
Yeah, like a good communicator can read the person she's communicating with. And the better they're at doing that, the better the other person understands. And I think you were talking about before, like teachers. Like a good teacher can understand the needs of each specific person. It's not trying to force you to understand a concept. He's going to try to figure out, how what your communication style is.
Yeah.
And that's the best way to transfer information. And it takes timing and temperament, all of those things. A really good expert will dial it in. And you said one of your teachers ignored you for a month, but it worked.
Right.
Because it motivated you. It motivated you to want to be seen or heard, and also when they spoke, you really, really listened.
Yeah, exactly.
And maybe that specific style worked only for you,
right?
But it worked. And let me see. I feel like we can keep going on these like sort of broad topics, and I'm hoping that people, we're communicating this to our audience properly.
Totally.
I'm trying to keep the audience in mind of because I wanted people to understand sort of your worldview and your philosophy in this first half of the of this interview, and I think we got a pretty good idea now.
Maybe they're painting while they're listening, hopefully.
Yeah, I think most of our listeners are painters, so that's probably what they're doing.
Yeah.
Let's both take a break. Welcome back. We're just back from a break, and so this half I want to get into more about your artworks, but before that, I also kind of want to figure out do you consider yourself a pessimist or an optimist?
I guess more of an optimist, or at least pessimist with the sense of humor at the very least. But I think more on the optimist side.
Yeah, it kind of does sound like that because, the way you approach art making and also how long you last depends on how optimistic you are.
Totally. Yeah.
I think it goes a long way to sometimes be sort of defiant against odds.
Yeah.
And to have that optimism gets you through the long marathon that is like art making.
Right. Yeah.
And what are your life goals? Like, what do you see yourself achieving, in this lifetime? Perhaps some people have visions of, being commercially successful, being at, showing at big galleries, things like that. So what is your version of that?
I think for me, again, how we spoke a little bit earlier about the perspective of the whole life, if we look at it, and even beyond life, because as artists, we do want to consider that too. I think, the biggest goal for me is to come up with the most powerful artworks. And I think that will help me to resolve and understand myself better, and just kind of discover and understand the world itself better. So I think it's, a painting. It's a study from nature, which allows us to evolve and get better and learn more. So I think, for me, I just wanted to push it as far as I can. And then while doing that, just still also live in life, But I think everything else will come to that, I believe.
I think that's a very wise and a better version or a very good achievable goal, because it's something you control. It doesn't have external factors in it.
Right.
It's something that's purely your output.
Right. But, in the end, I think a lot of the frustration that people may feel may be coming from trying to control too much something what they are not in control of. So, for example, we cannot control what other people think about it. We cannot control the time. There's just so many things that we're not in charge of. But it also takes away the attention from the things that we are in control, we are in charge. We are in charge of our life, of our craft. How well can we do it? How much can we learn? So I think, concentrating on that just allows us to be better artists and better humans, I guess.
I like that. Being better humans. I feel like there's not enough of that lately. I think the world is pretty polarized right now, and I'm actually doing another podcast with my friend, talk about just media manipulation, and we talk about the rise of extremists on both sides.
Yeah.
And obviously it's not healthy, and just making art kind of like grounds you, I think.
Right.
Hopefully it grounds people.
I think it definitely does, if there would only be more people to actually listen to it. Just like we said that, painting is the quietest art out there. So it's always there, it kind of, by definition, I don't think you can be, some kind of strange extremist, if you're looking at Rembrandt works. You probably would have learned something about life and nature that would not allow you to become that, So, and I think, kind of like directing more attention towards education, the history, just kind of also recognizing that we are not the first ones who are living the life. There were a lot of, millions of people before and generations on top of the generations, and we're standing on the shoulders of those generations, and then we want to build our knowledge not from the scratch, like a caveman. Instead, we want to build it on top of the knowledge and art that already exists. So we don't need to reinvent the wheel. Instead, we need to build on top of something that already exists. And I think that's where we also want to be careful with technology, because that's where it kind of takes away from a lot of the other fields. That's a great field, and it's great that it's been so developed, but it's not takes away from all of the other fields like history, literature, art, and all of those things. That also truly needs to be studied.
Do you have any contemporary artist that speaks to you in that way?
Relatively contemporary. I do like Andrew Wyatt. I do think he's an incredible artist. I guess he's not as contemporary anymore, right? Because he passed away. But he's still pretty recent. His works are pretty recent. And his ideas on art are pretty incredible. And I enjoy just looking at his works again. Just purely his works could tell me so much about his life, about his experience, about his sensitivity, about his world. So I think our art almost allows us to see the world through somebody else's eyes. It cannot be described through anything but just painting or literature, right? So I do like him a lot.
Okay. But nobody that's living, do you think that speaks to you like that? You don't have to have one. I'm just curious.
Right. No, I guess there are many, but I don't know. I guess nothing really comes to my mind.
Fair enough. Yeah. What has been some of your biggest challenges in art making so far, or life in general?
Yeah. I think, the really big challenge is to kind of learn how to learn, and just kind of follow the path without knowing where exactly it will bring you, because we cannot always be in control of the drawing. We could have a better day or a worse day, but that shouldn't prevent us from proceeding, and again, kind of relying on the discipline more and more when we work. So I think that's been a challenge, because, especially when we're so fixated on the result in painting doesn't really come so soon, or drawing. And I think to pursue it and continue, and that's what's so difficult. And, by meeting seeing, right, hundreds or thousands rather, our students, are at our students league, because the pace changed so fast. There were a lot of very talented people who dropped it or didn't fully continue on it because they didn't have that faith. So I think developing faith that could allow you to continue fully on that journey is probably the most challenging thing, because we, as an artist, we don't know when will be that time when we could produce our best works. It could be when we are 60 or 70 or 80, or 30, right, or 40. We really have no idea, because it's our artist journey is a long life. Here it's where it's different from being an athlete or sport, right, where we could have our best results, within a certain range, whereas in painting it's very different. Our best works could be, we don't know when.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, I don't know if you had the chance to see that huge show of Turner's work at the Met. I think it was at the Met. And his output was insane.
Yeah.
Like, it filled so many rooms.
Yeah.
And, you start at the first room where it was like early on in his career, and all the work just looked very academic, beautifully painted.
Yeah.
And then at the end of the room, as I think he was going a little bit more blind, saw this like smudged,
right,
more abstract expressionist work. And it was powerful in a different way.
Right.
And everything in between. But it's arguably, like, it's hard to figure out which was his best output.
Well, that's tricky, right? Even when we look at Rembrandt, we could say, like, who's better, the early Rembrandt or the late Rembrandt? And I don't think there is an answer, because if we think about it, we could say that a certain painting could be only done at a certain stage of your life. So even if 60-year-old Rembrandt would try to be a 30-year-old Rembrandt, he would not do it, because he wouldn't have a mentality or a sensitivity of the 30-year-old. He wouldn't have that vision of seeing the world. It would just be completely different. And it doesn't mean that he was not as good when he was that age. It's just a matter that his world was different at that age. His life was different in that age. What he was facing in that particular moment was also very different. So that's also so fascinating, that on every stage of our journey, our works would also reflect our life at that particular moment. So I don't think it necessarily means that it's better or not. It's almost like, there could be cases, right, where it does get better, but it's also, almost like when we look at, a Rococo painter, Goya, right, which is easy to forget that he's also part of Rococo. His early works, so festive, kind of similar to what we could see at Watteau, or, a lot of the other artists, right? But then later, when the world was overloaded with this artificial, too sweet festivity, it reached the point where the darkness started coming out of it. And when we look at the late Goya, it's kind of like a hangover result after a really long party, right? And it would not be possible in his younger years, he wouldn't have this sort of optimism. He also probably wouldn't have that certain naivety, right, too. And I say naivety not necessarily in a bad way, but also in a good way. Again, like we could see that, a lot of the romanticism coming from writers in a lot of the younger years, and then in the later years, often something else just as valuable, but from the different point of view. It's almost like, I don't know, three ages of the person, right? This, that, and this. There are even paintings like by Van Dyck or something, like where we see different ages of the one person.
So you seem to have a pretty decent way of looking ahead or having perspective on your life. Where do you think, what stage are you at in your works of art? Like, I imagine you've gone through, the many different stages of your painting series, where are you at now? Where do you think you are? If you were to try to figure that out yourself.
Yeah, I guess I don't know. Like, I think, it's almost like, like they say that life is the kind of experience that will leap forward but can understand only backward kind of thing. So it's almost like, it's something that, but while being part of it, it's hard to make sense of it or put it into a certain period, right? But then as the time goes by, then it becomes so obvious, right, on the perspective of the whole life. But it's kind of hard to tell, right? So that's why I feel, when artists kind of artificially create periods for themselves, it's like, oh, this blue period for a month, then now it's a green period, now it's a purple,
Right.
It's just, I think, it's more so, it kind of happens on its own. And then I guess like it could be left for someone who could look at our life through perspective, right? And even if it's worth looking at it, that's another question, right? Well, we were discussing, that how many contemporary artists we, with 100% certainty, know that, people 100 or 50 years or 30 years from now will still be looking at.
Right.
So it's also, it's maybe not even our place to discuss it. Like, I think it's something that we want to see through the perspective of time.
Fair enough. I'll ask you that again, maybe 20 years from now, maybe. And yeah. Another thing I wanted to know was like, do you have any other skills besides painting? And if so, what is it that you really, I guess another way to put that is like, did you ever consider choosing a different career based on a different skill set?
Yeah, I really like movies, and film. So I was into that at some point, and that's how I kind of got introduced to art. So I was really into, different artistic kind of movies. But I kind of realized that you have so little freedom, and you kind of depend on so many things when you work with film or movie, that it's just hard to produce anything. Whereas when you paint or draw, all that you need is the surface and the brush, and you're good to go. So I kind of like that freedom. And then with time, I also like more painting and drawing. But no, I think I'm fascinated by a lot of different things, like, music or literature, I enjoy. So if I absolutely cannot paint and I had to choose something else, I love music. I'm not sure how much, talent I have, but I do love classical music too, or I love literature. But again, I have no idea, I just love it as a viewer more. I love playing football, soccer, but I'm not as good at it. But if I could be like a Messi or something, that would be nice. But I'm not sure, But that's the kind of decision that you probably want to make, like really early. But I still, I enjoy it as a hobby. Like, I do it all the time.
Yeah, I think it's great for painters to have some sports, physical activity that they do, because you just spend a lot of time sitting in one place.
Yeah.
It's very unhealthy.
Yeah, and now just like what you were saying, that I got reminded that I was listening to an interview of this piano player, and he was saying that he really enjoyed the word amateur, for the reason because amateur in the very core of the word has the word amour, so it means love. So basically, he was saying that a lot of the professional people who work in his field of music, very little of them actually enjoy what they're doing. And he was insisting on the idea that he is amateur, even though he's incredible, pianist, and he's incredible at it. But he was emphasizing the idea that he's an amateur, meaning he just loves what he's doing, and he kind of allows himself to fail at it if he had to, because he just simply enjoys it. And I think that's really incredible about it. And I think at the league it was a similar atmosphere, because a lot of the people who were going there, they already had other careers. They already had families, a lot of them. They already had whatever you can have. but they still felt like they were missing something, and that something was art. And so they were happy to be amateurs at it. It wasn't treated as a competition. It wasn't treated as a job. It wasn't treated as anything like that. Instead, it was treated something as you purely from the depth of your soul, you enjoy and love. And I think, from that perspective, I think it's just nice to look at things like that and just kind of remove that pressure of being professional, whatever that means.
Yeah, there's a lot of loaded words that come with it, like the weekend painter.
Right.
I've been painting for years, but because I have a full-time job now, I am technically a weekend painter.
Right.
So does that make me not fully, not a full-time painter, not professional? Am I an amateur?
Right.
I think these words are too, they don't describe things properly.
Right, totally.
I think a lot of painters now have multiple jobs. They teach maybe sometimes 80% of the time.
Yeah.
And sometimes they only spend the rest of that, in the studio. And they also have to, balance that out with personal life, whatever it is, whether they're parents or single parents, or they just have a big social life, whatever it is. And I also wanted to go back on the concept of loving what you do. And I think we talked about it a little bit during the break. I think I like to really refine the meaning of that, because when that piano player is talking about how much he loves his craft, it's not like fun love. I don't know how to explain it properly yet, but I think it's more discipline, right? Like we were saying before, like I think using sports as an analogy, like a marathon runner doesn't love having to run so much, but they still love it. The love comes with pain, lots and lots of pain, discomfort, probably a lot of other negative emotions, but those are the things that come in the short term, right? The love is something that transcends all those short negative periods while you're doing it. Like while you're painting, you might not love it. It might be painful, or maybe it's not. It depends on different people. But when people say it so lightly, I think that's what all that means.
Yeah. It's almost like, that song, right? How deep is your love, or something like that. It's a matter, again, something could be called love, but then if the love is sacrificed for for not putting enough work into it, how deep is your love down in there, right?
Exactly.
So it's like, so it's a matter, if you love something truly, then you are able to proceed and put the best version of yourself into it throughout the years for a really long time. And even regardless of any bumps on the road, and even when the journey feels hard or painful, like you said, or not easy, it's still joyful because on the long run, what I mean, on the kind of perspective when you can look back and you could say, I wish I did it, I wish I woke up early and I did this and that and that. So I think that, again, a really great comparison would be with athletes, right? They keep putting that work. And it's so cruel. If you don't get the result either. But they don't just do it to torture themselves. They don't just do it because it also doesn't work. If we, no matter how hard you push someone, or even if that someone is yourself, if you just push yourself for the sake of suffering and hurting yourself or trying to prove something without having actual deep love to it, it also will not bring result. It all very quickly will fall apart. You will run out of motivation really quickly, and you will hit the dead end very soon, because you can't really run away from truth, right? It's gonna catch with you. But I think if it's coming from the really deep feeling for it, it doesn't even feel like suffering, because you keep the target in front of yourself all the time, so you know exactly where are you going with that.
Just having that perspective, that long-term perspective.
Right.
Yeah. And I think that's easy to lose on if you're too much in the weeds. You lose the thread. You lose the
Yeah, but it's a marathon, just like you said. It's not a sprint. It's a
lifelong
marathon. Yeah. Yeah.
I think that's the beauty of painting, that you could just keep doing it until you physically you can't see or move.
Yeah.
You could keep doing this as long as you live. Now we're gonna start talking about your paintings. So, how are you choosing your subject matter, or like, how do you approach painting when are you thinking, I'm gonna make a new series, or like, are you just painting whatever you have planned out? Like, how do you start?
If we go back to the very idea, like where that idea of painting, from the start is really coming from, I think it's like we look at something, or we are part of a certain moment, and we want to capture the moment for whatever reason, right? For example, when you're a child and you see a beautiful sunset, and you just sit in there and enjoying it, and then you just want to say like, I wish I could capture it. And I guess nowadays you can just pick up the camera, take the photo, and then you realize that the photo looks pathetic, and then you're like, okay, that doesn't look like anything like what I'm seeing. But I think it's just that idea of seeing something in nature, seeing something in your own life, experience, and just seeing and telling yourself, wow, this is interesting. It's almost like if someone tells you the story, and your friend or someone, and then you could say, wow, that sounds like a book or something, like you should like write it down or make a podcast about it. So it's almost like it's worthy of sharing, right? And it's similar with visual experience. It's almost like, you live your day-to-day life, and then all of a sudden you become an audience to a certain scene that you wish you could share, right? And I think that is beautiful, right? And for example, when we look at Vermeer, it's almost like we walk into a certain room, right? That he's sharing the intimate parts about his own life, right? And I think that's just, we're kind of capturing moments in our own life.
So as I look around your studio, I see a lot of portraits, and I don't know if these models are your friends or if they're hired, but apparently they are part of your life, right?
Yeah.
So tell me more about that. What am I looking at here?
Well, I think, the most universal language that we have is a human form, either human body and human face and hands and shoulders. So like we can communicate through those shapes so easily, right? And it's not about the portrait itself, because, again, it's unfortunate, right, for portraiture that the portrait is only being valued if it's a portrait of your grandkid or uncle or a dog or something, right, or something like that.
Yeah.
But the portrait on its own, as a thing, as a phenomena, has its own value, because there are certain human qualities to it that captured there, that it's not about that particular person, it's not, so the idea, at least the way I try to approach the portrait, not always successfully, but just with an idea that it has to be not just this, but it has to communicate something on the level that we could look and we could just relate on the level of shapes, on the level of colors, on the level of brush application, and all of that together should create something that will be interesting and communicate something to the viewer that is valuable or interesting.
And easier said than done.
Right.
But we're gonna get into the technical part of it on pretty soon. What I'm gonna be doing is picking up the camera so that we can kind of go around the studio and we could sort of dissect your paintings, if that makes sense, for the audience, so they actually get to see what we're talking about. But before we do that, I just have a couple more questions. Like, do you have any favorite portrait artists, whether it's dead or alive? I imagine dead.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a tough one. I guess, like the first one that I saw and was like absolutely fascinated was Rembrandt, and I think it probably gonna stay that way to some extent. Like I just absolutely, it's the kind of artist that the more you look, the more you find, and so it's pretty obvious answer. To me, very predictable too. But I mean, another predictable answer. I do love Velasquez, but that wasn't a love from first sight. It took me a really long time. It's actually when I started painting a lot more, when I started, because for me, the thing with Velasquez was I couldn't tell what was the difference from other Spanish painters like Murillo, let's say, or Zurbarán, or, Ribera, or, another Spanish artist from that similar time period. But then I started recognizing certain qualities about Velasquez way, way later. And then I started seeing it completely differently. And it was so shocking how blind you could be, how what you know is so how what you see is so limited by what you know. And that was a revelation to me with Velasquez, and I do value him, very, very high when it comes to portraits. But I think, there are many, like if I love, Repin, just like I mentioned, I love Zorn or Sorolla or Sargent, or, obviously Van Dyck, when it comes to portrait, or Terborg. That's another one that I was looking. He's pre-Vermeer artist, and his works, and his tiny little portraits are so full of life, and he's so very underrated in that kind of like world. But I think he's just as good as any, and the expression on his works are so alive. I mean, obviously Titian, and Giorgione, and just so many, so many. Like, and I constantly so excited about finding something new. And yeah, it's just unfortunate, with time there are so many of those artists just disappear, right? And we have to kind of rediscover them.
Yeah, and the funny thing, or not funny, but interesting thing about Velasquez, I feel like a lot of people arrive at Velasquez in a very similar trajectory because his work is so sophisticated.
Yeah,
it's like very acquired taste. It's like, working up from a beer to like a single malt.
Yeah.
You really have to get the other things in just to get your palate refined enough to appreciate.
Totally. He's like artist, He's almost like, the entry point is so hidden. And I think he's the kind of artist who's not screaming with his skills. He's rather like, he's very quiet. So like if you don't know where to look, you might walk by, but you would make a big mistake if you do, because you'll find so much, But I mean, I'm honestly, if I were to listen, I would be disappointed that I didn't mention, a lot of art. Like when you said, I'm surprised you didn't mention, I was just going to say Caravaggio or something like that. But like, there's just so many, and it just goes on and on and on. And, Franz Hals and like all of those painters, just so incredible.
Yeah. And what was that one painting that we were looking at? He looks a bit like Santa Claus. It was all draped in red.
Oh, right. Yeah.
At the net. I was staring at that thing for a while. Yeah.
Pierre Hubert.
Okay, so I'm gonna just put the name in this video, and you'll see what we're talking about. Right. And you called him the Mad Pope, or right. Pope Benedict the 14th. Yeah. But yeah, it's an amazing portrait.
Yeah.
That you could just keep looking and finding more and more incredible. About it. Yeah. So I keep talking about grabbing the camera and walking around. So I'm actually like finally gonna do it. So we're gonna pause for a little bit, and when we come back, I'm gonna have the camera on a gimbal, and you're gonna get to see this beautiful studio. All right. Be right back.
Hi, so welcome to my studio. So here's just a couple projects I'm working on, and my setup kind of might be different. I do move the easel around. I do like to work on a couple of paintings, at the same time. Meaning I kind of like shuffle them, first one, then another one. So whenever I run into troubles with one, I do definitely try to resolve it. But I think, there's a certain amount of seeing things freshly disappears if we look at it too long. So I do like to, work on something for a little bit, then switch it again to kind of preserve freshness. But yeah, those are just the things I'm working on at the moment. Or some of them are complete, some of them are on the way to be complete.
Nice. Tell me a little bit about this painting in particular.
Right. Well, it's just the current project. I think I'm heading more towards final stages. I think it's almost easier to get your painting 90% done, and then the last 10% could be a real struggle. So I think I do need to work on, a nice final details. That doesn't mean that I'm trying to complete parts on its own. I'm trying to complete image as one large piece, so every detail works for the benefit of the whole. But, it's, I think after a certain point, something just clicks and it feels right. And it feels like there's a certain moment in our life that we did capture it. And we could say, okay, well, this is accomplished.
So this painting looks like it is very fresh, right? Like it looks like you just, the model just left. And then this is, you're just painting her from life and she just left like 10 minutes ago.
Yes.
But in reality, were you painting from life, and how many hours has this painting gone through so far?
I think, it probably been like 3 sessions and 3 hours each. I was working from the photograph mainly on this particular one, but I think it's also a matter of using whichever tools we have to to achieve the result that we want in the end. Like I think it's actually very possible when we can work from life and make our paintings look like photographs because we're so highly influenced by it. And it's also possible to do the other way around. But I think in terms of freshness or in terms of immediacy of the emotions, it's also very important for a painting. Like for example, when we look at Franz Hals or, Sargent, there's always that feeling that the sitter is just about to leave or about to move or about to look away, and that's something that we want. We don't want it to feel stiff or stuck, right? It has to be, there has to be this kind of dynamic, in the painting.
Totally. Let's talk about the cast hanging on the wall. Like, where do you often draw from them, or what's?
I think it's a matter of also seeing how, because when we paint from life, it's not only the matter of copying, it's a matter of selecting. More importantly, it's also realizing what is more important, what is less important, how to present that information, how to group that information. And I think the best way that we could learn that is from cast. And I think that's where we want to, really study from cast and really study from examples. So I think, and for a reason, in academies, for the longest time, you would be drawing from drawings and from cast before you're even allowed to draw from nature, because you need to know what to do with nature. So I think that is important. I think those are just reminders. I definitely need to expand the collection. I have more over there. I have all of the different, figures and, different parts of the body and face, and stuff. But it's just something, it helps to make a better choices from life when we draw and when we paint.
What about these paintings that you have stacked up here?
Yeah, they're not really in any particular order. It's just, it's just a lot of paintings. Like, I do believe that quantity turns into quality. So we want to, I try to just, just like we say, discipline or no, inspiration and no inspiration. It's just a matter of consistently working, right? And so that's kind of what I'm trying to do with my own works. So I produce, different paintings from different moments from my life, from different subjects that I find interesting.
What is your output level? Like, how many paintings are you making, I don't know, in a month?
Good question. I think probably a lot, but it does. There are a lot of them that are sketches, right? And there are a lot of them that some of them are more successful than the others in the end, and I'm not afraid to admit that, it's you don't, no matter how good your skills are, there are still some projects that could be more successful or less, and I accept that idea. But probably a lot. Like, I would say that, even in one day I could start, 2 or 3 paintings, and sometimes I could finish one in that same day. And it could be some kind of sketch, and I could go back to that sketch and develop it a little bit more. But also, on the contrary, sometimes certain paintings go on for months. Like, I work on it, I let it sit, then I pick it up again and I tweak it and I paint over and I try again. So it's really hard to predict. There's just no way of knowing which one would give you troubles in the end or which one will go smoothly.
As we look at these paintings, there's a very distinct look that you have created. So, as you said before, I think that just comes from the way you see the world, I think.
Right.
And the way you paint is just a reflection of it.
Right.
And yet there are some very specific ways that you paint and techniques that you apply really successfully. And I remember when you were teaching that course, I really loved the way you talked about how you create the masses and how you handle the edges.
Yeah.
And they seem like simple concepts, but they're actually in practice very difficult to do. And you make it look easy in these. And I think this is a really good example of a successful execution of creating masses and really good edge handling, or I don't know how else to say it, but
thank you.
There's like, if you look at these ears, it's mostly it's like a color mass. It's like an abstract shape, and if you see that part of her hair, it's kind of disappearing into the background, and also how her shirt and sweater disappears into the background. It's really nice. Like, the overall effect is pretty amazing. So talk me through what you're thinking when you're painting these works.
Well, I think, kind of like you said, right, it's the most difficult thing to create something simple. So I think, by going through so many complex theories, we trying to bring it back to that simple idea. And I think a lot of it being dictated by nature itself. So, I think if we stay true to what we see, we try to accurately imitate it, our work will get better, better, and better. But then if we don't, and if we just instead, if we think too much about things theoretically, like in terms of anatomy and structure, right, without actually applying it, it takes us away and our work ultimately gets weaker. So I think it's a matter, again, as because I, during our live class, I often hear, people asking, and expecting different answer, but I guess the answer is always the same. It really just takes so much time, it takes so much work, and it just continuous journey, right? That we need to continuously get better at it. So I think, and that's from where the true style, the true voice coming from. It's almost like, if you're an opera singer, you're trying to develop that voice for a really long time. And you work with what you have, but it takes a long time to really frame that diamond, even if you do have an incredible voice.
Mm. And do you have any drawings lying around?
Yeah. Let's see.
It's always good to show some drawings.
Let's see. So I have this one. Let's see. I have a lot of those in the pads. So if I go through the pads, I could find many.
Oh yeah, that'll be cool.
Yeah.
Nice. Are these drawn from life or?
I think
photos,
this is from photo, and that was a Raphael copy that I was doing recently.
Nice.
Let's see.
I see one here. Obviously, all of these drawings happen underneath these paintings, but we won't see them.
Yeah, it's almost like a drawing as a kitchen of an artist. You never, you often don't get to see it.
Right.
Let's see. There was like this little pad. I'm not sure where did it end up, but let's see. Okay. There it is.
Oh, nice. Very nice. And is that from life or one of the bark?
Oh no, those are one of the bark plates that we actually did in our online class.
Oh,
So that
really?
was a demo.
Very cool.
Let's see. So there are more of those demos. Let's see. I guess this one. I guess that one full of closet, but I think there's.
And if somebody wanted to take a class with you, how would they do that?
I think through the Academy Everywhere at the New York Academy of Art website.
Do you teach at other places too, or?
At the moment, the workshops, but the Pennsylvania Academy workshop will be coming up soon too, but in a couple of months.
Okay, great. So I'll add that in the show notes,
Awesome.
so people can could check that out. And then when this interview comes out, your new course, pre-recorded course, will be coming out soon. So that's going to be great. And it's going to be a great supplemental thing to this interview, or vice versa, because a lot of the things that we talked about now, people will actually get to see you do it.
Oh, totally.
Very nice. Excellent. So, I think we're gonna wrap this up soon. Do you have anything you'd like to add? Any advice for artists out there?
No, just keep going, keep painting and keep looking for a good knowledge when it comes to drawing and painting, because it's something that we cannot fool. So we need to search for something that is true, like a true knowledge. And it's very difficult to find, it's kind of hidden out there.
Indeed. All right, Konstantin, it's been great. Thanks for inviting me to the studio. Till next time.
Awesome.
Bye.